Chapter 1, Dust on the Wind. The stagecoach smelled of hot leather, dust, and the peppermint candy the smallest children kept sucking. And Caleb Wren had long since decided the best a man could do inside it was hold still and wait for the country to end. He sat wedged into the corner nearest the door, hat tipped low, his big hands loose on his knees. Across from him, the widow Mrs. Ambrose had folded herself and her 4 children into the opposite seat like a hen settling over a clutch. And beside her the young woman they all called Miss Ruth kept up the endless, patient work of keeping little ones from coming apart. Caleb had counted them once out of the corner of his eye, the way he counted cattle at a river crossing. 4. A boy near grown, a girl with watchful eyes, and 2 small ones the same size, twins by the look, one who never hushed and one who never spoke at all. He had not counted them out of tenderness. He had counted them because counting was easier than thinking, and thinking led places Caleb no longer went. 2 years a widower, and he still woke some mornings reaching across a cold half of the bed, his hand closing on nothing, the whole quiet house waiting on a woman who would not come down the stairs again. So he watched the seam of daylight under the window curtain and said nothing, which suited him. He had ridden 3 days to buy a bull he did not truly need, mostly for the excuse of being somewhere his own empty house was not. A man could stand a good deal of dust and heat and cramped company if it kept him from his own front porch, and the 2 graves on the rise behind it. "How much farther, Miss Ruth?" the talking twin asked. Etta was the quiet one Caleb had gathered. This was Ben, and Ben had questions the way a creek had water. "How much farther, and are there Indians, and why does the man not talk?" Ben Ruth's voice was low and even, a schoolroom voice worn smooth. "We do not remark on strangers." "But why does he not?" "Because," she said, "some men keep their words for when they need them. That is a fine habit and one you might try." Caleb did not look up, but the corner of his mouth moved, just barely, under the brim of his hat. Across the jolting little box, he felt her glance touch him and slide politely away. The road climbed and the coach began to sway harder, and it was then the smaller twin, Etta, silent Etta, went pale and pressed a hand to her mouth. Ruth had her out of the middle of the seat and up against the window in one smooth motion, one arm across the child's chest, the other hand smoothing the damp hair back from her forehead. "Look far off, sweetheart," Ruth murmured. "Not at your feet. Find something that isn't moving and hold your eyes on it." She tipped her chin toward the horizon out the window. "There, that blue mountain. It hasn't stirred a step all day, the lazy thing. You watch it and it'll steady you." The child fixed on the far blue line, and by slow degrees the color came back into her cheeks. She did not say thank you. She did not say anything. But she leaned into the young woman's side and let herself be held, and Ruth bent her head and kept it there, saying nothing more, asking nothing. Caleb had seen men gentle green horses with less care and more noise. He found himself watching over the edge of his hat, the sureness of those hands, the way she gave the frightened little thing something solid to fix on instead of empty comfort. She was young, he thought, younger than she carried herself. There was a plain gold pin at her collar and ink stains long scrubbed and faded on the side of one finger, a woman who read and taught and had somewhere along the way learned to be steady for people smaller than herself. When Ruth glanced up and caught him at it, he did not look away quick and guilty the way a man might. He simply inclined his head, a bare half-inch, the way one hand acknowledges another across a corral. She colored faintly and returned it, the same small measured nod, and that was the whole of it. A moment, wordless, gone before it fairly began. But it sat oddly warm in Caleb's chest, and he frowned at the curtain and made himself think about the bull. "They're up on the ridge again," the driver called down, not loud, meant for the box, but carrying. "Been shadowing us since the wash, 3 riders keepin' to the high ground." Mrs. Ambrose's head came up sharp. Caleb watched her hand go to her collar, close around something on a cord beneath her dress, a shape he made for a key, small and worn bright, and hold it fast. Her knuckles whitened. She said nothing, but her eyes went to her children and then quickly away, as though looking too long might mark them. "Likely drovers," Caleb said. It was near the first thing he'd said all day, and his own voice sounded rusty to him. "Cattle country up high this time of year." The widow looked at him. For a moment something passed behind her face that he could not name, a woman weighing whether to lay a burden down on a stranger's shoulders. Then she smiled, thin and brave, and said, "Of course, drovers." She did not let go of the key. Ruth had gone still. She was no fool, that one. She had heard the driver plane and read the mother planer, and now she gathered the talking twin closer and set her hand on the older boy's arm. Sam, the boy, was called. He'd been trying all day to sit like a man and had mostly managed it. He stiffened under her hand but did not shrug it off. "Miss Ruth," he said, very low, if something. "Then you'll mind me," she said, just as low. "And mind the little ones, and be exactly as brave as I know you are, and not one bit braver. You hear?" The ridge fell behind. The road bent down into a long, dry reach of country, sage and red dirt and heat shimmer, and for a mile or two nothing happened at all, which was somehow worse than if something had. Caleb sat with his hat down and every sense come awake and singing. He knew the feeling. He'd known it in the war and known it since, the particular quiet a body learns to distrust, the held breath of a country that means to do a thing and is only waiting on the ground of its own choosing. Under the seat his hand found the walnut grip of the old pistol he carried more from habit than hope, and rested there, easy, not drawing it, only knowing where it was. He did not want the children to see a gun. He watched the widow instead. She had gathered the little one's hands into her lap, one and then another, the way a woman gathers thread before a storm, and her lips were moving, and Caleb did not need to hear the words to know she was praying. It broke all at once. A shot flat and far, then another, close and enormous, and a man's voice shouting words that had no shape. The coach lurched. The driver bellowed at the team and the whip cracked and the whole world tilted as 6 horses hit a gallop with the harness screaming. Dust boiled up gold through every crack. There was more shooting then, a ragged storm of it, and hooves hammering alongside, and somewhere above them the driver cried out short and hard and then did not cry out again. "Down," Caleb had the word out before he knew he'd meant to speak, and he moved, reached across the pitching box and took the nearest child, which was Etta, silent Etta, and folded her down into the well of the floor with his own body curved over her like a roof. Small hands gripped his shirt. He heard Ruth shouting the children's names, heard Ben screaming, heard the mother's voice rise once, clear and fierce over all of it. "Sam, the coat, remember the—" And then the coach left the road. He felt it go, that long, sick float when the wheels find nothing. The world turned over. There was a sound like the end of the world made out of wood and iron, and Caleb had time only to lock his arms around the child and take the fall on his own back and shoulder. And then there was a great deal of noise, and then, strangely, very little at all. Dust, and the tick of a wheel still spinning somewhere, and the far-off drum of horses going away, growing smaller, gone. Caleb lay in the wreck of the coach with the smell of blood and crushed sage in his nose, and could not for a moment recollect which way was up. The child beneath him was breathing. He fixed on that. She was breathing, quick and shallow, her face buried in his chest, her whole small body shaking but whole. "Easy," he said, or tried to. It came out a rasp. "Easy now, easy. I've got you." He got an arm braced and pushed himself up off her by inches, everything in him protesting, and looked. The coach lay on its side against a hummock of sand, one wheel gone, the door above him now hanging open to the white sky. The team was scattered and cut loose, the traces trailing, the horses run off with the men who'd cut them free. And the children. He counted, old habit, 4. Sam was pushing himself up out of the sand, blood on his lip, his eyes wild and finding each of the others one by one the same as Caleb was doing. Lucy sat clutching Ben, who had stopped screaming and gone dreadfully quiet, which was its own kind of scream. And Etta beneath him, alive, wide dark eyes turned up to Caleb's face and holding there, fixed on him the way she'd fixed on the far blue mountain, because he was the thing in all the ruin of the day that was not moving. 4 children, alive, wide-eyed, utterly alone. Caleb turned his head slow and looked for the widow and found what he found and shut his eyes a moment, and did not let the children see his face while he did it. The driver was gone too, up the road away where he'd fallen. There was no help anywhere in that whole roofless country, not a rider, not a roof, not a soul, and no sign at all of the young woman with the sure quiet hands. "Miss Ruth," Sam said, and his voice cracked clean down the middle, all the man gone out of it, just a boy now. "Where's Miss Ruth?" Caleb got himself up out of the wreck into the terrible light. He turned a slow circle, hat gone, gray eyes moving over the sage and the road and the dry wash cutting away to the south, and he saw the horses' dust settling and the shape of the overturned coach and 4 small faces turned up to him waiting to be told what was so. The ant was nowhere, thrown clear, taken, lost nowhere he could see. The wind came up off the flats and lifted the settling dust and carried it away thin against the sky. and Caleb Wren stood in the middle of the ruin with 4 orphaned children looking to him, and understood, the way a man understands weather coming, that whatever was left of his own closed and careful life had just ended, and something else entirely had begun. Chapter 2, A Man's Word. The quiet after the guns was worse than the guns. Caleb Hargrove stood in it a long moment, one hand braced against the splintered wheel of the overturned coach, and made himself count what was left. It was a habit older than his grief. When a thing broke, you took stock before you tried to mend it, so he counted. 1 canteen half full hooked to the ruined boot of the coach. No horses, the team had been cut loose or driven off, and their tracks ran east with the shod prints of men who had no more use for this place. A rifle he did not have. A knife he did. Miles of high desert in every direction, pale and shimmering, with the stage road a thin scratch across it, and the nearest town a full day behind. And 4 children. They stood clumped together in the shade of the wreck like calves that had lost the herd, and they were watching him. That was the thing that reached past the ringing in his ears and the ache in his side where the coach had thrown him. 4 faces, dust-streaked, and 8 eyes fixed on the only grown man still standing. He knew what they were asking without a word passing. They were asking whether he was safe. Caleb had buried a wife 3 winters back and had not much wanted to be looked at by anyone since. He had climbed onto this coach a closed man, meaning to ride the whole way to the railhead, saying as little as a body could. He had barely marked these children beyond the carsick's smallest one and the young woman who'd soothed her. Now the young woman was gone and the mother was gone, and there was no one else, and the plain arithmetic of it settled on him like a yoke. He straightened up slow, so as not to spook them, and crossed the little distance between, and then, because towering over frightened things only made them more frightened, he went down on one knee in the sand. That put him below the tallest boy's eyes. The boy stiffened, jaw working, trying to stand square in front of the smaller ones the way he must have seen men do. 12, maybe, old enough to know what had happened and too young to carry it. "What's your name, son?" Caleb asked. "Sam." The boy's voice cracked on the one word, and he hated it. Caleb saw him hate it. "I can look after them, I don't need." "I know you can," Caleb said. "You already have been. I watched you put yourself in front of them just now. That was a man's move." Sam blinked. Whatever he'd braced himself to argue against, it wasn't that. The girl beside him was perhaps 9, sharp-eyed, with a little one clinging to each side of her skirts. She had not stopped studying Caleb's face since he'd knelt. She was the one deciding. He turned to her. "And you?" "Lucy," she said, careful. "These are Ben and Etta, they're 6. A beat. They're twins." At the sound of their names, the boy twin, Ben, peered out. "Are the bad men coming back?" he asked. "Where'd the horses go? Is Mama?" And there Lucy's hand found his shoulder and pressed, and the question died, and the child looked up at Caleb with a terrible need for the answer to be no. The other twin, the girl, said nothing at all. She had a fistful of her sister's dress and her thumb near her mouth, and her eyes were too wide and too dry. Etta. She did not ask about the bad men or the horses or her mama. She did not ask anything. Caleb let the silence sit for a breath. Then he did the only thing he had to give, which was his word. "Listen to me, all of you." He kept his voice low, and even the way he'd gentle a colt that had never felt a hand. "My name's Caleb. I've got a ranch a day's walk from here with a roof and water and a stove. I aim to get every one of you to it safe. I don't make a promise I can't keep, so I'll only say what's true. I don't rightly know all the how of it yet. But I gave my word just now, and out here a man's word is about the only thing worth a damn. I'll see you home. Everyone." Nobody answered, but Ben's grip on Lucy's skirt loosened a notch, and Lucy let out a breath she must have been holding a long while, and something in the set of Sam's shoulders came down half an inch. The terror did not leave them. It only cracked, a hairline letting in a little light. It was enough to work with. He put them to work, which was mercy dressed as chore. Idle hands in shock only shook, busy ones forgot to. He unbuckled a length of curtain leather and the 2 coach doors, and rigged a lean-to of shade against the wheel, and had Sam hold the pole and Lucy weight the corners with stones, and Ben fetched the stones, one at a time, running, glad of the running. He uncapped the canteen and let each of them drink in turn, a mouthful, no more, and when Ben protested he crouched and explained it the way you'd explain it to a hand. That water out here was money, and you spent it slow so you'd have some when you needed it most. Ben considered this with grave 6-year-old attention and did not ask for more. Only Etta would not drink. He held the canteen to her, and she turned her face to Lucy's shoulder. "She hasn't talked," Lucy said quietly at his elbow so the little one wouldn't hear. "Not since. She talks all the time, usually, more'n Ben even, but not since it happened." The girl's voice wobbled and firmed. "Is that bad? Is something wrong with her?" "No," Caleb said, though he did not know, and he made himself sound like he did. "Some folks, when a thing hits too hard, the words go and hide a while. They come back. You keep talking to her regular like she can hear you because she can. Don't fuss at her about it. All right." Lucy nodded, fierce, and filed it away like a girl who had already appointed herself keeper of the small ones. He left them in the shade with Sam standing guard, proud of the trust, and went to walk the wreck. He told himself it was for supplies. It was partly a lie. There had been a fifth passenger, the young aunt who'd hummed to the sick child through the worst of the road, Ruth, he'd heard the mother call her, before there was no more mother to call anything. In the last seconds before the coach went over, he had a smeared memory of her flung sideways, out and away, into the dry wash that ran alongside the road. He had not let himself look yet. Now he made himself. The wash was a gully of pale sand and creosote, and he went down into it and along it, reading the ground the way he'd read cattle sign his whole life. Drag marks where something heavy had slid. A dark stain on a rock that he crouched over and did not like. And then, snagged on the thorns of a bush a dozen yards on, a shawl gray wool, a woman's, torn but whole. He worked it loose and held it. He walked the wash another 100 paces in both directions, slow, quartering the ground. No woman, no body. Not in the wash, not under the brush, not anywhere he could find, and he found most things he went looking for. A dead woman does not get up and walk off. A hurt one might. He looked at the drag marks again, and now he read them different, not something dragged, but someone dragging themselves up and out the far side, toward God knew where. He could not follow far. He had 4 children behind him and a canteen going empty and the light already sliding down the sky. But he folded the shawl small and pushed it inside his coat against his chest. And he decided privately, in the flat, quiet way, he decided the important things, that the woman was alive until he had cause to believe otherwise. He did not say so to the children. Hope was another thing you spent slow. If he told them their aunt might be living and it proved false, he'd have killed her twice in their hearts. So he carried it alone, the folded gray wool warm against his ribs, and climbed up out of the wash with his face giving away nothing. He was halfway back to the Linta when Sam's voice went thin and high. "Mr. Caleb Dust, riders, there's dust." Caleb turned. Far off east and south, where the road bent toward the low hills, a smudge hung against the hard blue, the kind of dust a bunch of horses kicked up, still miles distant but coming or seeming to. Could be a relief coach, could be a rancher's men, could be the ones who'd done this, riding back for whatever they'd been paid to leave undone. Out here you did not gamble a child's life on the friendly odds. "Off the road," Caleb said, already moving, low and fast and calm, because calm was catching and so was panic, and he meant to give them the one and not the other. "Every one of you with me, quiet now, not because we're scared, because we're smart. Sam, take Ben. Lucy, Etta. Come on." He gathered them into the wash where the shadows were long and the brush stood high, and pressed them down behind a shelf of rock, and put himself between them and the road with his knife loose in his hand and his body a wall. Ben opened his mouth, and Caleb laid 2 fingers gentle against the small shoulder, and the boy swallowed the question whole. Etta pressed her face into Caleb's sleeve. He let her. They waited. The dust hung and shifted and thinned. Whatever it was had turned off along some track of its own and dwindled north and away until the blue was clean again, and the only sound was the wind working the creosote. Neither rescue nor ruin, not yet, just the country reminding him it owed them nothing. Caleb let his breath out. "All right," he said, "all right." "Good, you did good." But it had decided him. Sitting by the wreck was a fine way to wait for the wrong riders to find them. Better to move at dusk, in the cool, and put distance between these children and this place before dark or the gang, whichever came first. So when the sun sat red and swollen on the rim of the world and the sand gave back the day's heat in a soft, steady breath, Caleb slung the canteen, took a last long look east down the road he'd been meant to ride, and started them west toward home. They went in a strung-out little line, Sam first with his chin up, then Lucy leading Ben by the hand, and Caleb last so he could see them all. Etta could not keep the pace on her short legs. Within a mile she was stumbling. Without a word Caleb bent and lifted her, and she came up light as a bird and settled against him as if she'd always meant to. One small fist knotted in his collar, and before the next mile was out, she was asleep on his shoulder, her breath warm and even against his neck. He walked into the falling dark with a stranger's child sleeping, trusting on his shoulder, and a dead woman's shawl over his heart that he'd decided belonged to a living one. And something in him that had been shut and cold since the winter he lost his wife shifted, quiet as a door easing open, and made a little room. He did not have a name for it yet. He only knew the grief had company now, and the company was these four, and that he had given his word. A man kept his word. That was everything there was. Chapter 3, The Long Walk Home. Ruth woke to the smell of blood and sage. For a long moment she did not know where the earth ended and she began. There was grit against her cheek, cold and fine as flour, and a sky above her gone the deep blue-black of late evening, pricked here and there with the first hard stars. Her head throbbed in time with her heart. When she tried to lift it, the whole world tipped sideways and slid, and she had to press her palms flat against the ground and simply breathe until it steadied. The wash. She was lying in the bottom of a dry wash, half under a shelf of undercut clay, with a scatter of gravel bunched beneath her shoulder where she had come to rest. She did not remember falling. She remembered the coach lurching, the horrible squeal of it going over, and then a great white flash of nothing. Her fingers found the swollen place above her ear, and the crust of dried blood matted in her hair, and she made herself stop touching it. "The children," she said aloud, and her own cracked voice frightened her. She got to her knees. Her left ankle screamed when she set weight on it, so she did not set weight on it. She crawled instead up the crumbling bank of the wash, clawing handfuls of brush and clay until she could see over the lip to the road. There was not much left to see. The last of the light lay low and red along the horizon, and against it the wrecked stagecoach made a black, ruined shape, tipped on its side. One wheel still stood free of the earth. As she watched, a little cold wind turned it slow and stopped it again. "Please," she whispered to no one, to everyone, "please." The walk to the coach took her longer than she would ever admit. She could not stand, so she went on hands and knees, dragging the bad ankle, stopping twice to wait for the sickness to pass. She counted as she went. It was a trick she used on the children when they were frightened in the dark. "Count the steps, Lucy, count them out for me," and she counted now to keep the black edges from closing over her sight. At 112, she reached the coach, pulled herself up the splintered undercarriage and looked inside. Empty. The relief of it nearly unstrung her. No small bodies. There were the cushions torn open, the mail sack slit and flung, her own carpetbag burst and trampled. Someone had been through it all with quick and greedy hands. And the strongbox that had ridden under Margaret's feet the whole journey, the box she would not let out of her sight and would not explain, was gone. And Margaret was not inside, neither was the driver. Ruth found them a little way off, dragged clear of the road and left in the brush, and she made herself look because to look away felt like abandonment, and she had abandoned no one in her life and would not begin now. But there were only the two. Only Margaret, her sister-in-law, her friend, the mother of the four dearest souls Ruth had in the world. Only Margaret and the old driver. Not the children. Ruth knelt beside her sister-in-law in the last of the light and took her cold hand and held it and said the words that ought to be said, though her voice broke apart on them. "I'll find them," she told her. "I swear it to you, Meg, whatever it costs. I'll find them and I'll keep them and I won't stop." The wind moved the sage. It was the only answer she was going to get, and she took it as a promise witnessed, and she let the hand go. Then she started to think. 4 children were not in the wreck, and 4 children were not lying in the brush. Either the men who did this had taken them, and her mind flinched hard away from that and would not hold it, or someone had got them away. She scrubbed the wet from her face with the heel of her hand, and began to read the ground the way her brother had taught her long ago, before books and cities, when they were children themselves on a hard-scrabble farm, and tracking a strayed calf meant whether or not the family ate. The light was almost gone. She had minutes no more. There churned earth all around the coach, hoofprints cut deep and driven hard, going east back toward the hills. Big horses, ridden men, no small prints among them that she could find. She crawled a slow circle, wider, her hands reading what her eyes were losing. And on the far side of the road, away from where the outlaws had gone, in the softer earth of the shoulder, boot prints. One set of a grown man's boots, large, deep, the stride of someone carrying weight. And around them, threaded between them, small prints. A child's shoe, another. The scuffed drag of a little one being walked when it did not want to walk. More than one child, several, going west away from the hills, away from the killing, out across the open flat toward, she lifted her head and looked into the dark, toward nothing she could see, toward somewhere. Someone had them. Someone had taken them alive on foot and walked west into the empty country. Ruth sat back on her heels in the dark, and something in her that had been coming apart all this while pulled itself, thread by thread, back together, and set and hardened. "All right," she said. She could not walk, so she would walk anyway. She found a shattered spoke that would serve for a staff, and she tore a strip from her ruined underskirt and bound the ankle as tight as she could bear and then a little tighter. And she took up the one canteen the robbers had not thought worth stealing, near empty, and slung it. And she got to her feet in the starlight with the wrecked coach at her back and the small prince leading on before her into the dark, and she followed them. She did not know if the man was a rescuer or a horror wearing a rescuer's shape. She only knew he had her children, and that she would put one foot in front of the other until she reached them, and that anything was better than sitting still. The prince went on, so did she. 2 days' walk and a world away, Caleb Vance came down off the last rise with a sleeping child on his shoulder, and saw his own house standing dark against the stars, and had to stop and let the sight of it go through him. He had not thought he would get them here. He had doubted it a dozen times on the road, in the killing heat and the cold that followed, with the little one burning up and Sam Gray in the face from carrying pride he was too young for, and Lucy never once complaining, which was worse than if she had. A man's word was the only thing Caleb Vance had left that had not been buried, and he had given it to 4 children on a dead road, and here, past all reason, was the ranch, and the word was kept. "That it, mister?" Sam asked. The boy had asked it at every rise for 2 days. This time Caleb could answer. "That's it," Caleb said. "That's home." He got the door open. The house had the still, cold smell of a place shut up too long, of a fire gone out and not relit, of a man who had not much cared whether he came back. It shamed him now, the emptiness of it, with children stumbling in behind him, rubbing their eyes. He lit the lamp. He built the fire, and his hands, that had done every hard thing a hard country could ask, fumbled the kindling like a green boy's, because 5 pairs of eyes, 6, when the twins both opened theirs, were watching him do it. And he had forgotten, in 3 years alone, what it was to be watched by anyone who needed the fire to catch. It caught, he fed them. He had flour and lard and salt and precious little else, and he made biscuits the way he made everything, with more force than grace, and they came out heavy as river stones and half of them scorched. He set the plate down expecting nothing. They ate every one. Ben or Etta. He still could not always tell the silent twin from the talking one in the lamplight, ate too, and looked at him, and Caleb looked away first, his throat tight over a plate of burned biscuits like a fool. "They're good," Lucy said, quiet, and he knew they were not, and he understood that the child was thanking him in the only coin she had, and it undid him a little. It was Lucy who took over after. 9 years old, and she moved through his rough house like she had lived in it, herding the twins to the water bucket to scrub their faces, spreading the spare quilts he dug from the trunk into a nest by the hearth. She did it the way a body does a thing it has done every night of its life, and Caleb, watching from the doorway with his hat still in his hands, understood all at once how these 4 had come through 2 days of hell with a stranger and not broken. They had been holding each other up. Sam carrying the weight, Lucy carrying the care, the twins holding on. They had a family already. They had only lost the roof over it. "You should sleep," he told Lucy low so as not to wake the twins. "I'll keep watch, been keeping it. Doesn't cost me anything." She looked up at him with her mother's steadiness. He did not know it was her mother's, but he felt the weight of it, measuring him one more time the way she had measured him on the road, deciding, night after night, whether he was safe. Whatever she saw, she let her shoulders down. "You'll wake me," she said, "if you need to sleep." "I'll wake you," he lied gently, and she knew it was a lie and let him have it. He sat up in the chair by the fire with the rifle across his knees and the 4 of them breathing slow in the firelight, and for the first time since he had dug his wife's grave, he did not feel like the last man on an empty earth. He felt like a man with something to guard. It frightened him more than the outlaws ever had. He was still awake near dawn when he heard the horse. One rider coming steady up the track, not fast, not sneaking. Caleb was on his feet with the rifle before the sound had finished, easing to the window, putting his body between the door and the sleeping children out of instinct he had not known he owned. He watched the shape resolve out of the gray, a big man, old in the saddle, a star of dull metal on his coat catching the first light. Caleb opened the door before the knock came. "Marshal," he said. Hollis touched his hat brim. His face was the face of a man who had been in the saddle all night and had ridden through worse. "Vance!" His eyes went past Caleb to the nest of children by the fire, and something in the old lawman's jaw eased and hardened at once. So it's true. Heard down the line, a man walked 4 young ones off the Cade robbery. He looked back at Caleb and lowered his voice to keep it from the children. "You've done a good thing. I'll not pretend it's finished, though. There's been 3 coaches hit on this road in a year, and every time those men leave something behind and come back for it." He paused. "They always come back for it, Vance, and I don't reckon they know yet they left 4 witnesses walking." Chapter 4, 4 plates at the table. Morning came slow and gray to the ranch, and Caleb Weir stood at the stove learning, for the 3rd day running, that biscuits were a harder country than any he'd ridden. He'd buried a wife and worked this land alone for 4 years, and in all that time the kitchen had asked nothing of him but coffee and a fried egg. Now it asked everything. He scraped the burned bottoms off with his knife, the way he'd seen Lucy do it without a word, and set the plates down along the plank table. 4 of them. He'd counted them out and stood a moment looking, because 4 plates on a table that had held one for so long was a thing that caught a man in the chest if he wasn't careful. "You burned them again," Ben said, not unkindly, the talking twin. He had his sister's silence to make up for and seemed to have decided he'd do it single-handed. "I did," Caleb agreed. "Miss Ruth never burned them." Caleb's hands went still on the coffee pot. He set it down careful. "That's so. She could do biscuits and she could do the flapjacks with the edges crispy," Ben went on, swinging his boots under the bench. "And she read to us at night out of the blue book, and she never hollered, only once when Sam climbed on the coach roof at the way station." He said it all in a rush, the way he said everything, and then his face did a thing children's faces do when they run headlong into a wall they'd forgotten was there. His mouth pulled down. He looked at his plate. Across the table, Lucy set her hand over her little brothers without a sound. 9 years old, and she carried them all like a woman twice grown. "Eat," she told him gently, and he ate. Caleb turned back to the stove so the children wouldn't see his face while he sorted what he'd heard. Miss Ruth. So the woman had a name and a place among them, not a stranger passenger, but theirs, kind to them, the one who read from the blue book. The shawl he'd pulled out of the wash 3 days back, folded now in the bottom of his trunk where the young ones wouldn't find it and grieve, belonged to a living woman until somebody proved otherwise. And nobody had. He'd told himself as much on the long walk in, and told himself again every night since. Hearing it from the boy's own brother made it iron. The days had a shape now, rough as a Greenbroke colt, but a shape all the same. Etta would not speak. She hadn't spoken since the road, and Caleb had stopped trying to make her, which seemed to be the only thing that worked. He'd learned that if he sat on the porch step of an evening and whittled without looking at her, she would drift over sooner or later and settle against his arm, watching the shavings curl off the wood. He was making her a horse. It was a poor horse. Caleb was a fence mender, not a carver. But she reached for it every night to see how much of it had come, and that reaching was its own kind of talk. The twins fought over everything and nothing, and Caleb discovered a man could stand between 2 6-year-olds like he'd stand between 2 bulls, one hand on each collar, and simply wait until the fight ran out of them. Lucy showed him how to braid Etta's hair so it wouldn't tangle in the wind, and he tried it with his big scarred fingers, clumsy as a bear at a loom, until the child sat patient under his hands and the braid came out crooked but held. Lucy pronounced it close enough, and that was as near to praise as the ranch had heard in years. It was Sam who wouldn't settle. 12 years old and gone hard around the eyes, the boy had appointed himself man of the family somewhere back on that road, and he wore the job like a coat too big and too heavy. He didn't cry. He watched the horizon. He asked Caleb once flat whether he had a rifle and where it was kept, and when Caleb said the smokehouse and locked, the boy's jaw had worked like he meant to argue. So Caleb was not surprised, the 4th morning, to find Sam's bunk empty and the kitchen door standing open on the cold. He cut the trail in the yard and read it easy, a boy's stride, angry and quick, headed for the ridge road that ran back toward the stage line. Caleb saddled the roan and did not hurry. He knew where a boy went when he thought he had to save everybody by himself, because he had been that boy once, and the memory of it was not a comfortable one. He found Sam 2 miles out, sitting on a rock with his knees drawn up, having discovered what the country teaches every man sooner or later, that it is very large and a person is very small, and walking into it with nothing but grief for provisions does not get one far. Caleb swung down. He didn't say what in the devil, and he didn't say you had us worried. He hunkered on his heels an arm's length off and looked out at the same nothing the boy was looking at. Figured I'd go back, Sam said finally, hoarse. To the road, see if he stopped. Somebody ought to. Ma had a box. She kept it under the seat and she made me swear to mind it and I didn't mind it. Those men had it and his voice cracked clean in two. I'm supposed to look after them. That's my job now, and I can't even carry water without Lucy showing me. Caleb let the wind have a turn before he spoke. You know why I brought you all here instead of staying by the wreck? He asked. Sam shook his head. Because a man's first job isn't being brave. It's being alive tomorrow so the little ones have somebody. Brave's easy. Any fool can be brave for a minute and get himself killed and leave 4 young ones with nobody at all. He picked up a pebble, turned it over. You want to look after them, you learn to read ground. You learn where the water is and where it isn't. You learn to keep your head when everybody else is losing theirs. That's the work. It's slow and it's dull and nobody thanks you for it, and it's the whole of the job. He looked at the boy. I'll teach you every piece of it if you want teaching, but not by you walking off into 40 miles of dry country in the dark. Agreed. Sam scrubbed his sleeve across his face, angry at the tears and unable to stop them. You'd teach me, he said, testing it. Said I would. The boy looked at him a long moment, weighing him the way Lucy had that first day, deciding whether Caleb was a thing that would stay. Then he gave a short nod and got up, and when Caleb put him up behind the saddle, the boy's arms went around his ribs and held on, and neither of them said anything about that, which suited them both. On the ride back, quiet, Sam said into his shoulder, Miss Ruth would have come back for us. Wherever she is, she wouldn't just, she'd come. I believe that, Caleb said, and found he did. He took Sam to town 2 days later, partly for flour and partly because a boy who'd tried to run needed to feel trusted. And Caleb had learned that much about people even if he'd never learned biscuits. The mercantile smelled of coffee and leather and the particular hush of people who stop talking when a door opens. Caleb felt it the way you feel weather change. He set his list on the counter, and Odell the storekeeper filled it slow, and the 2 women by the dry goods shelf watched Sam over their shoulders and murmured behind their gloves. That's them then, one said, not quiet enough. The Marsh children, whole coach lost but them. Money in it, I heard, land back east and a name. There's a lawyer come asking, genteel fellow, city clothes. Been in the hotel 2 nights asking after them by name. Says he's kin, uncle. Poor mites to have kin like that come after 'em, only now there's a purse attached. Caleb kept his eyes on his list and his voice level. This lawyer, he said to Odell, he give a name. Odell glanced at the women, then leaned in. Thaddeus Marsh, or Thaddeus something Marsh, one of those double-barreled names. Asked was there a rancher took in 4 young ones off the Butte Road. He paused. I said I didn't rightly know, Caleb. Figured that was your business to tell, not mine. Obliged, Caleb said. He paid and gathered the sacks and steered Sam out into the street, and the boy was pale under his freckles. He can't take us, Sam said. He can't just, we don't even know him. He never once. Nobody's taking anybody, Caleb said, and meant it as a wall a boy could lean on and hoped it was one. But riding home with the flour and the news both riding heavy behind him, Caleb turned it over and did not like the shape it made. A lawyer with a genteel smile wanting the children the moment there was money in them. And somewhere out in that same country, the men who'd stopped the coach, who'd taken a box a dying woman had made her boy swear to mind. 2 hands reaching for the same 4 children from 2 directions, one wearing kid gloves and one wearing a gun, and neither of them caring a thing for the children themselves. He'd given his word on that road. I'll get you home. He'd thought at the time it meant a walk and a roof. He understood now it meant more and might yet mean everything he had. 12 miles east, where the stage road bent into the town from the far side, a woman came down out of the hills on foot. Ruth Marsh had been 4 days walking. The dress she'd left the coach and hung off her in ribbons of dust. Her shoes had given out and she'd bound her feet in strips of her own petticoat. Her lips were cracked and her eyes fever-bright above cheekbones grown sharp with hunger. She'd followed boot tracks and small footprints until the rain took them, and then she'd followed the only thing left, which was the road, because a road goes somewhere and somewhere was where the children had to be. She walked into the edge of town at dusk and put her hand on the first hitching rail she came to, because the street had begun to tilt. An old woman sweeping a porch dropped her broom and hurried over. "Lord above, child, you look near dead. Here, sit, sit." "The children," Ruth's voice came out of ruin. She gripped the woman's wrist. "4 of them, a boy of 12, a girl of 9, twins, from the coach on the Butte Road. Please, have you did anyone?" The old woman's face changed, went round with knowing. Why, yes. Yes, honey, there's 4 young ones. A rancher took 'em in off the Butte Road. Everybody's been talking. They're alive, all 4 there." Ruth heard asterisk alive, and the ground came up soft to meet her. She was on her knees in the dust with the old woman's arms around her, and she was laughing and weeping at once, the sound of it terrible and glad. "Alive, all 4. And in the same breath the second thing landed, the thing the old woman said next, low and troubled, that a fine city lawyer had been about the town for days, asking after those very children by name. Hope and dread came into Ruth Marsh together in a single breath, and neither would let go of the other. Chapter 5, The Woman at the Gate. The dog knew before Caleb did. It was late afternoon, the light gone long and gold across the yard, and the old blue heeler had been dozing in the shade of the porch when it lifted its head, ears swiveling toward the road. Caleb was at the corral splitting the last of a cedar log for kindling, sleeves rolled, sweat cutting clean lines through the dust on his forearms. He set the axe down when the dog stood, because the dog did not stand for jackrabbits. Sam saw it too. The boy had been forking hay to the mule, and he went still in the way Caleb had come to recognize, the stillness of a child who had learned that the world could turn to gunfire in a heartbeat. "Somebody's coming," Sam said low. "I see it." Caleb wiped his hands on his thighs and stepped toward the rifle leaned against the rail. He did not pick it up. He only wanted it near. A single figure had come around the bend where the road climbed out of the draw, and it was walking, not riding, and it was walking wrong, a stumbling, dogged sort of walk, the walk of someone who had been walking a long time and had decided that stopping was not something they were going to do. A woman's. He knew it by the skirt, torn and stiff with dust, and by the smallness of her against the big empty land. She had a hand pressed to her side. She came on toward the gate like a thing pulled by a rope, and when the light caught her face, Lucy dropped the bucket she was carrying. The bucket rang against the hard ground, and water went dark across the dirt, and Lucy was already running, screaming a word that Caleb had never heard the girl raise her voice to say. "Miss Ruth, Miss Ruth." Then all of them were running. Ben came pelting from the barn with straw in his hair, and the twins never went anywhere apart. So Etta came behind him, silent Etta, who had not made a sound in 11 days, who ran now with her arms out and her mouth open in a cry that had no voice behind it, but was a cry all the same. Sam went last and slowest, because Sam was 12 and had decided somewhere on that long road that boys his age did not run weeping. But his face had come undone, and he was not fooling anybody, least of all himself. The woman at the gate made a sound Caleb felt in his own chest. Her legs went. She caught the gatepost and slid down it to her knees in the dust just as the children reached her, and then she was buried in them, all 4 at once, her arms not big enough to hold them and holding them anyway. Lucy had her around the neck. Ben had a fistful of her sleeve, and Etta had crawled straight into the middle of her, pressing her small face against the woman's throat, and Caleb heard the child make one word, cracked and rusty as a hinge left out in the weather. "You came," Etta said. Ruth went rigid. She pulled back just far enough to look at the little girl's face, and whatever had held her upright through the miles broke clean through. "Oh," she said. "Oh, my baby. Oh, you talked to me." And she gathered the child in and rocked her and wept without any shame in it at all, there in the dirt of a stranger's gate, while the sun laid its gold across the whole of them. Caleb stood back by the corral rail and did not go to them. It was not his moment. He had carried these children out of a killing ground and walked them a day and a night across open country and given them his word, and none of that made this his. This was hers. He had suspected it from the first, the shawl and the wash, the name Sam spoke like a prayer. Miss Ruth was with us. Miss Ruth was kind, and here at last was the woman herself, alive against every reasonable expectation, put back together with her own children in her arms. He felt the gladness a man feels watching a family reassemble itself, and under it, so low he could pretend not to hear it, something that sounded like a door closing quiet in another room. He gave them a long while. When he came across the yard at last, he came slow, with his hat in his hand, and he stopped a respectful distance off. Ruth looked up at him, over the heads of the children. She was younger than he had braced for, early 20s, no more, with a plain, strong face gone hollow at the cheeks from hunger, and a bruise fading yellow along her jaw. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen and altogether steady. She looked at him the way a woman looks at a stranger who has been alone with everything she loves, which is to say she looked at him carefully, weighing him, one arm still curved around Etta as if she might have to snatch the child up and run. "You're the man," she said. Her voice was wrecked from the road. "The one from the coach. Sam told me they've been telling me all at once I can't." She stopped and pressed her lips together. "You kept them." "I gave my word I would," Caleb said. Something moved behind her eyes. "Words are cheap out here." "They are," he agreed. "I kept it anyhow." She held his gaze a moment longer, and then Lucy was tugging at her, pouring out 11 days in a rush. The biscuits Mr. Caleb burned, and the ones he got right, the bed he'd given up, how he'd found Sam when Sam ran off, how he let Ben name the barn cats. Ruth listened to all of it with her eyes still on Caleb, and by the end of it the careful weighing had softened into something he could not name and did not trust himself to. "Come up to the house," he said. "You've walked a hard way. There's coffee and there's stew and there's water to wash. Whatever else needs saying can wait till you've eaten." She let him help her up. Her hand in his was all bones and blisters, and she flinched when she put weight on her side, and Caleb marked it and said nothing, only steadied her the length of the yard while 4 children orbited her like she was the only fixed point in the turning world. She ate like a woman who had forgotten she was allowed to. Caleb kept the bowl filled and kept his eyes off her, busying himself with the fire, and when the twins had climbed into her lap and gone heavy with the particular sleep of children who have been afraid a long time and have suddenly stopped, she set down the spoon and told him, in pieces, the rest. The wash, waking in the dark with the world spinning and her side stove in against a rock. Crawling back to find the coach picked clean and her sister. She said the word sister and then could not say more of it, and no children among the dead, thank God, only boot tracks and small footprints leading off. So she had followed, on foot. Days of it until the town and a word overheard, 4 young ones, a rancher, a day's ride south. "They're mine," she said. "My sister's, but mine now. There's no one else. Their father's 3 years dead, and my sister," her hand smoothed the sleeping twins' hair. "I'll take them off your hands soon as I'm able. I only need to get my feet under me. A day, maybe 2, I won't impose." Caleb turned the coffee cup in his hands. Outside, the dark had come down, and the coyotes had started up somewhere off toward the mesa. "Take them where?" he asked, not unkind, just plain. Ruth's chin came up. "I'll manage." "I don't doubt you'd try." He set the cup down. "But the coach is gone and everything in it. You've no horse, no home standing. From what Sam tells me, the sister's place was sold up when her husband died. And there's a man in town." He watched her face when he said it. "A lawyer, been asking after these children by name before you or I ever got there, asking about what they're due to inherit." He saw the fear go through her, quick and controlled, and he saw her put it away for the children's sake, and something in him bent toward her that he made himself hold still. "Thaddeus," she said quietly, "their uncle. He never wanted them a day in his life." Then walking into town alone with 4 little ones and no roof and no dollar is walking straight into his hand. Caleb leaned back. "You'd have no ground to stand on. He'd take them before you got your feet under you, like you say." Ruth was silent. Lucy, curled against her arm, had fallen asleep with her fist knotted in the woman's dress. "Stay," Caleb said. The word landed in the quiet kitchen and sat there. "Stay till it's settled," he went on, careful now, the way he'd approach a horse that had been badly used. "There's the room off the kitchen. It's the children's now, and there's space for you in it. There's work I can put you to if you're set on earning your keep, and I'd not turn down the help. You get your strength. We figure the lawyer. Nobody takes these children off a walking woman with nothing, but off a standing house with a man's word behind it. That's a harder thing to do." He stopped. "That's all I'm offering, shelter, till it's settled." Ruth looked down at the children heaped over her, the twins asleep, Lucy asleep, Sam nodding by the fire and fighting it. She looked a long time. When she raised her head, her eyes were bright and her jaw was set hard against the brightness. "I can cook better than you," she said. "Sam tells me the biscuits are a war crime." The laugh came out of Caleb before he could catch it, low and rough and rusty as Etta's voice had been. "He's not wrong," he said. They put the children to bed together, and it was a strange and easy thing, the passing of a sleeping child from her arms to his and back, the low words over which quilt and which side. When it was done, they stood on the porch a moment in the dark, and the cool came off the land and the stars stood out hard and white. "Thank you," Ruth said, "for keeping your word, whatever else, thank you for that." Caleb looked out at the dark yard. "They're good children," he said, which was as near as he could come to saying the rest of it. He was about to bid her good night when the healer stood up again. Not toward the road this time, toward the barn where the land dropped into the draw, a low growl starting deep in its chest, hackles lifting. Caleb went still. Out there in the blackness, up on the ridgeline where a man would sit a horse if he wanted to watch a house without being seen, something moved, a shape blacker than the dark around it. There, and then, when Caleb took one slow step toward the rifle by the door, gone. Ruth had gone rigid beside him, following his eyes. "What is it?" she whispered. Caleb kept his voice easy and his hand on the rifle. "Nothing," he said. "Get on inside now." But he stood a long while on that porch after she'd gone, watching the empty ridge where no honest man had reason to be at night, and he thought about the marshal's words. They always come back for what they leave behind. And he understood, cold and certain in his gut, that the walking had not ended after all, that it had only stopped for the length of a supper, and that whatever had followed those children across the high desert had followed them here, and was watching, and knew now exactly where they slept. Chapter 6. What the coach was carrying. The key came out of Ruth's pocket the morning after the watcher's tracks were found, and it lay on Caleb's kitchen table like a small iron question no one wanted to ask aloud. "It was in the hem of my traveling skirt," Ruth said. She had her hands folded tight to keep them from shaking, which Caleb had learned was her way. The trembling came, and then she made it stop, and she went on. "Margaret pressed it into my hand in the coach before the riders came. She said, 'Keep this, say nothing.' I thought she was only frightened. I didn't understand." Caleb turned the key over. It was too heavy for a house door, too plain for a jewelry box. A strong box key. He'd seen there like on the express coaches, hung on a chain at the guard's belt. "She was carrying something," he said. "Something worth killing for." "The deed," Ruth's voice dropped, though the children were out in the yard and the door was shut. "My sister's husband bought land before he died, good land, water rights along the Powder. When he passed, everything went into trust for the children. Margaret was taking them east to settle it, to keep it out of." She stopped. "Out of whose hands?" "Their uncles." Ruth said the word the way a person says a splinter. "Thaddeus, their father's brother, a lawyer. He wrote letters, all of them kind, all of them about the children's welfare, and Margaret read every one and burned it. She said a man who talks that much about caring for children has already worked out what they're worth." Caleb set the key down. Outside, Ben was asking Sam something for the fourth time, and Sam was answering with the flat patience of a boy who decided being the oldest meant never running dry. Etta sat on the step with her chin on her knees, silent, watching the road the way she always watched the road. "So the coach was carrying the papers that make the children rich," Caleb said slowly, "and a strongbox to keep it all locked. And the men who hit us weren't after mail." "They were after that," Ruth nodded at the key. "And they didn't get it, which means they're still looking, which means the tracks in my yard last night weren't a stranger lost off the road. He'd found them at dawn. One horse, held quiet 100 yards out past the corral, a man who'd stood long enough to leave a heel print pressed deep and a spent quirly ground under it. Someone patient. Someone who'd wanted to see the shape of the place before he came into it." Ruth pressed her fingertips to her mouth. "They think the children have it or know where it is." "Do they?" "I don't know, I don't." She turned toward the window and Caleb saw her decide something. Lucy remembers things the little ones don't. Let me talk to her." "Gently." They did it together in the end because Lucy would not be spoken to alone about her mother. She'd gone stiff and white at the first careful question, and it was Caleb, crouching down to the girl's height with his hat off, who broke it open. He didn't have Ruth's words. He had only the plain thing. "Your mama was smart," he said. "Smart enough to hide something so bad men couldn't find it. If you remember any part of it, you'd be finishing what she started. You wouldn't be telling tales. You'd be helping her." Lucy studied him a long moment, 9 years old and older than that. "She sewed," she said finally, "the night before we left, after she thought we were asleep." She had her coat, the gray one, the good one, turned inside out on her lap, and she was sewing something flat into the lining. Papers, I think. They crackled. Her lip trembled. I didn't say anything. I pretended I was asleep because she looked like she'd cry if she knew I was watching. Ruth made a small sound and pressed the girl to her. Caleb straightened slowly. The gray coat, he said. Where's the coat, Lucy? Mama had it on, Lucy whispered. In the coach. And the coach was a day's ride out on the stage road, overturned in a wash, picked over by outlaws who'd been hunting the very thing sewn into a dead woman's coat and had, by the grace of God and their own greed for the visible strongbox, missed it. They took the box, Caleb said, mostly to himself. Bolted to the floor, likely, they'd have pried it and found it empty of the deed. That's why they came back. That's why they're watching. They know the papers left that coach some other way. On her, Ruth breathed, or with the children, they don't know which. The room was quiet. Then Caleb said the thing that had been building in him since the tracks at dawn, and he said it the only way he knew, which was flat and certain, and without room in it for argument. Then we get there first. Ruth looked up at him. Something passed over her face, not the wariness of that first day at the gate, not the brace-to-leave stillness she'd worn all week. Something warmer and more frightening than either. We, she said. We, he hadn't meant anything by the word. He'd meant everything by it. He heard it land between them and did not take it back. They talked it through at the table after the children were bedded down, a lamp low between them and the map of the country Caleb kept in his head laid out in words. When to ride, what to carry, whether to send word to Holly's first or go quiet. Ruth was quicker than he was with a plan. She saw around corners, laid out the coach's likely condition, argued that the coat might have been carried off by scavengers or weather, and that they should be ready to find nothing. Caleb found he liked being argued with. His wife had been gentle and gone 8 years, and he had forgotten the particular pleasure of a mind that pushed back. At some point they were both leaning over the table, and the lamp put its light up under Ruth's jaw, and Caleb was aware, all at once and too late, of how near she was. She'd stopped talking. Her eyes had come up to his and stayed. Caleb, she said, and it was not about the coach at all. He did not remember deciding to move. He only knew the small distance was closing, that her breath had caught, that his hand had come to rest on the table a hair from hers. I can't sleep. Ben stood in the bedroom doorway in his too-long nightshirt, one fist rubbing his eye, entirely unaware. Eda's foot is on my side, and I already asked her twice, and can I have water, and why is the lamp still? Ruth was up and across the room, laughing in the shaky way of a person laughing at herself, gathering the boy against her skirts. Water and a moved foot, sir, right away. She did not look back at Caleb, and the back of her neck had gone pink, and Caleb sat very still and let his heart come back down out of his throat and thought, well, so it was that then. He had wondered. The marshal came the next afternoon. Holly's rode in slow, as he did everything, and he did not get down right away, which told Caleb the news was bad before the old man said a word. He sat his horse and looked at the children scattering to the porch and the woman coming out to stand in the door, and he took his hat off, which he'd never once done in Caleb's yard. Miss Ruth, he said, Caleb, there's a thing you ought to hear sitting down, but I don't reckon sitting will help it any. He'd ridden from the county seat. A lawyer named Thaddeus Vance had filed on the children, a petition for custody, blood kin, the nearest surviving relation, all in order and stamped and witnessed. He had papers. He had a judge's signature already on the temporary grant, and he was in fact a day or two behind Holly's on the same road to take the children into his charge. On what standing, Ruth said, her voice had gone to iron. I'm their aunt. I've had care of them since. You're the mother's sister, and you're not married, and you've got no home standing and no money that the court can see, Holly said, not unkindly. And he's the father's brother, a man of property, with a house back east and a bedroom for each of them, so his filing says. The law looks at that and sees a solved problem. He turned the hat in his hands. The law don't always look far enough. I've met his kind, but what I think of him don't sign any papers. He doesn't want them. Ruth's hands were shaking, and she let them. He wants the estate, the land, the trust. It all comes to whoever holds the children until they're grown. He wants what the coach was carrying, same as the men who wrecked it. He's just wearing a collar and a smile to get it. Holly's old eyes moved to Caleb. That may be, but you'd need to prove it, and you'd need to prove it fast, and right now the paper's on his side and not yours. He put his hat back on. I'll do what a marshal can. That's less than you'd want and more than he'll like. Get your house in order, the both of you. He'll be here before the week's out." He rode off into the long gold light, and Caleb stood in the yard with a woman he'd nearly kissed the night before, and 4 children who did not yet know that a stranger with their father's face was coming to take them away. And he understood that the deed sewn into a dead woman's coat had become the only wall standing between this family and the men who'd tear it down, outlaws on one side, the law itself bent crooked on the other. "We ride at first light," he said quietly, "for the coach." Ruth nodded. She did not argue this time. The intrusion came in the black hours before that first light. The dun mare screamed first, a horse's full-throated terror that brought Caleb up out of sleep with the rifle already in his hands. He was through the door barefoot in the cold, and the corral was a churn of frightened stock, the top rail down, the mare wheeling wild-eyed at the far fence, and nailed to the gatepost, pale in the starlight, a square of paper. He tore it down, charcoal, block letters, a hand that wanted to be understood. "The children know where it is. Give it over or we come inside." Behind him, the ground told the rest. Boot prints crowded up close to the house this time, right up under the shuttered window where Lucy and the twins slept, and Caleb's blood went to ice. The trap door to the root cellar under the linta stood open, its contents shoved aside, someone's search cut short. Cut short by the mare's noise, by minutes, by luck. He'd been keeping the key down there, in a coffee tin, behind the seed potatoes. The tin was on its side in the dirt, the lid off. Caleb crouched, heart slamming, and found the key still inside it, small and cold and undiscovered, and let out a breath he felt he'd been holding since the ridgeline a lifetime ago. Ruth was in the doorway with a lamp, and the children's frightened faces crowding behind her skirts, and Caleb closed his fist around the key and stood, and knew the noose had just drawn tight enough to feel. Chapter 7, Papers and Promises. The buggy came up the ranch road at mid-morning, and Caleb knew before it stopped that Trouble had learned to wear clean clothes. It was a hired rig, too fine for the country. The man who stepped down wore a gray town suit and a watch chain that caught the sun, and he set his boots on Caleb's ground the way a surveyor sets a stake, like he was already measuring what he meant to keep. Behind him, a second man stayed up on the seat, narrow-faced and quiet, and Caleb marked him the way he marked Weather. That one had a gun under his coat and knew how to wait. "Mr. Caleb Rays," the man in gray said, smiling, "I am Thaddeus Aldous, the children's uncle." He let the word rest there a moment, warm as a lamp. "Their mother was my sister, God rest her." Ruth had come out onto the porch with a dish towel still in her hands, and Caleb heard the breath go out of her. Behind the screen door, 4 small shapes had gone still. "You're a hard man to reach out here," Thaddeus went on pleasantly. "I've been searching for these poor children since I had the terrible news." He drew a folded packet of papers from inside his coat and held it out, not to Caleb, but past him to the porch to the woman. "I've come to take them home." Ruth did not move to take the papers. "They are home," she said. Thaddeus's smile did not slip. It only deepened the way ice thickens. "Ah, Miss Ruth, the aunt." He said aunt the way another man might say hired girl. "You've done them a great kindness keeping them together. I'm sure the court will note it. But you'll understand the children are my blood, and I am their nearest and lawful relation. These are custody papers, filed and stamped in the territorial court. They make the matter simple." Caleb took the packet then, because Ruth's hands had begun to shake, and he would not let this man watch them shake. He read slowly. He was not a lettered man the way Ruth was, but he could read this much. The seals were real, the names were right, and the law, for the moment, stood behind the stranger in gray. "Mama said," came a small voice from the door. It was Lucy, 9 years old and standing in front of the twins like a fence rail. "Mama said if anything happened, we go to Aunt Ruth. She said it plain." "Children misremember, sweetheart," Thaddeus said gently, and the gentleness was the worst of him. "Your mama was frightened at the end. She wasn't thinking clearly." He crouched, bringing his soft face down to the level of the screen door. "I have a fine house. You'll each have your own bed. Won't that be nice?" Etta made a sound. Not a word. Etta had not made a word since the wreck, but a thin, high sound like a rabbit under a hawk's shadow, and then the patter of bare feet as she fled back into the dark of the house. Ben went after her. Sam did not run. Sam, 12 and trying to be 40, stepped down onto the top porch step and put himself square between the man and his sisters. "We don't want to go with you," Sam said. His voice cracked on the last of it, and he hated that, Caleb could see, but he held his ground. Something crossed Thaddeus's face, quick as a fish under ice, and Caleb saw the thing beneath the lampworm's smile. Just for a breath. Then it was gone and the smile came back. "Well," Thaddeus said, rising, brushing his knees. "Feelings, naturally, children form attachments." He turned to Caleb, businesslike now. "I won't be cruel about it. It's late in the day and my animals are tired. I'll take a room in town tonight and return in the morning with the marshal to make the handover orderly. Say 8 o'clock. He tucked his gloves into his belt. "Have their things packed. There's no need for it to be ugly." He was halfway back to the buggy when Ruth's voice stopped him. She had come down off the porch, and though her hands still shook, her chin did not. "What will you do with them?" she asked. "4 children, a man alone, a house in the city. What will you do with them truly?" Thaddeus paused. Perhaps he judged them beaten already. Perhaps a small, cruel part of him wanted them to know. He half turned, and the smile he gave her was almost fond. "There are excellent institutions," he said, "for children in reduced circumstances. Clean, Christian, they'll be looked after until they're of age." He said it as though it were mercy. "The estate can't very well raise them, can it? It's a matter of property, deeds, rents. It wants management, not a nursery." He climbed up beside the narrow-faced man. 8 o'clock, Mr. Rays, do have them ready." The buggy turned and went back down the road, and its dust hung a long time in the still air before it settled. Nobody spoke. Then Sam said very low, "He's going to put them in a home." He looked up at Caleb, and all the false grown man had gone out of his face. He was only a boy now, wide-eyed. "He wants the money. He doesn't want us. He's going to lock the little ones up somewhere." "Sam," Ruth began. "I heard him," Sam said fiercely. "I'm not stupid." Caleb put his hand on the boy's shoulder. It was becoming a habit, that hand, and the boy no longer flinched from it. "You heard right," Caleb said. He would not lie to Sam. Lies were what the man in gray dealt in, and Caleb would not trade in the same coin. "Now go on inside and find your sister. Tell her the man's gone. Don't tell her the rest yet." Sam went, though it cost him to leave a grown-up problem behind. Inside, when the twins were quieted, and Lucy set to mending by the window, Caleb and Ruth stood at the kitchen table with the papers between them like a snake that might still bite. "There's nothing," Ruth said. Her voice had gone flat and terrible. "I keep thinking there must be a word, a clause, something, but he's their uncle. He's a man of means. He has the seal of the court. And I'm—" She laughed, and it broke in the middle. "I'm a governess who lost the very children she was hired to mind. A stranger woman with no husband, no house, no dollar to her name. What court in the territory hears me over him?" "He hasn't got them yet," Caleb said. "He has the law, Caleb." She pressed her palms flat on the table to still them. "Tomorrow he brings the marshal. If we run, we're kidnappers. If we fight, they're taken anyway, and we're in a cell, and the children have no one at all." She looked up at him, her eyes bright and furious and afraid. "I would take them and go tonight, into the mountains, anywhere, but running is no life. They've had enough of the road." Caleb was quiet a long moment. He was a man who did not waste words, and he was turning one over now, feeling its weight, the way he'd feel a stone before he set it in a wall. "There might be a way he can't answer," he said at last. "There isn't." "He said it himself." Caleb tapped the papers. "A single man, a house with no one in it to raise a child. He said the estate wants management, not a nursery. That's his whole case, near enough that he's fit and we're not." He met her eyes. "A court might see it different if it wasn't a governess alone standing up to him. If it was a married home, a man with land and a woman to keep it, and 4 children already fed and clothed and loved under one roof. A family, in the eyes of the law." The kitchen went very still. Out the window, a hen fussed at something. Ruth's hands had stopped shaking. They'd gone quite still, the way a thing goes still when it's been struck. "Caleb," she said softly. "I'm not—" He stopped, and for the first time since she'd known him, the quiet man seemed at a loss for the ground under his own feet. "I'm not saying it light. I buried a wife, and I never thought to say such a thing again to anyone." He looked at his hands, then at her. "But it's the one door he can't shut. And I wouldn't hate to walk through it. Not with you. That's more than I meant to say." Ruth's eyes filled. She turned quickly to the window so the children wouldn't see, and Caleb had the sense to say nothing more, to let the enormous thing sit between them and take up all the air in the room. It was too big to answer in a breath, and he hadn't asked her to. "Let me think," she whispered. "Just let me think." They didn't get the chance to finish it. The knock came at dusk, and it was Marshal Holly's, hat in his hand and his old face grim in the last light. He would not come in. He stood on the porch and said what he'd come to say plain, the way he did everything. "Wanted you to hear it from me and not the town," Holly said. "That lawyer Aldous. He's not who he lets on." He worked his jaw. "I sent a wire down the line on account of I don't trust a man that soft. Word come back tonight. He's in debt to his hat brim. Speculated the sister's estate near to nothing before she ever died, and the only thing that squares his book is that deed the coach was carrying, the one the Cade gang's tearing up the county looking for." He let that settle. "Caleb, he's been seen in town, talking with a fellow that rides for Rowan Cade." Caleb felt the cold come up through the floor. "You saying?" "I'm saying the uncle and the outlaws want the same strongbox," Holly said. "And I'd lay money they've shook hands over it. He gets the children signed to him lawful, he gets the deed, and Cade gets his cut. Everybody paid but 4 young uns." He put his hat back on. "I got no cause to hold Aldous. Papers are papers, but I'll be here at 8 and I'll stand as square as the law lets me. That's all I can give you tonight." He rode off into the dark. Inside, Lucy had lit the lamp, its light warm and small against the great blue dark pressing at the windows. Ruth stood in the middle of the kitchen with her arms wrapped around herself, and something in her finally gave. Not loud, she would not let the children hear, but her shoulders folded, and the tears came without any fight left in them. "Tomorrow they take them, and he's in with murderers, and I can't stop any of it. I can't, Caleb, I can't lose them again. I walked all that way, and I found them, and now." Caleb crossed the room and took her by the shoulders, gently, the way you'd gentle a spooked thing, and he did not let go. "Look at me," he said. "You're not losing them." "You can't promise that." "I gave my word," he said, low and even, "on a road with the dust still settling, that I'd get 4 children home. I mean to keep it. And I'm giving you a word, too, right now." His hands tightened, steady as a fence post set deep. "Whatever it takes tomorrow, the marshal, the courts, the man in gray, Cade, and all his devils, they go through me first. You hear? You're not alone in it anymore. Not you and not them." She turned her face into his shoulder and let herself be held, and neither of them said the rest of it yet, the word too big for the room. But it was there, sitting with them in the lamplight, warm and enormous and patient, while the dark stood at the windows and waited for morning. Chapter 8, The Dark Hour. The dawn came gray and wrong, the way a morning does when a man has not truly slept, but only lain still with his eyes open, waiting for it. Caleb stood at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee gone cold in his hand and watched the light bleed up over the ridgeline, and he thought that he had never in his life dreaded the sun the way he dreaded it now. Today they would take the children. Uncle Thaddeus had said it plainly the evening before, tapping his papers against his palm like a man patting the flank of a horse he already owned. 9 o'clock. A wagon would come. He had a place for them in the city, he said, temporary arrangements, the best that could be managed under such tragic circumstances. His smile had never once reached his eyes. Behind Caleb, the house was too quiet. Ruth had gotten the little ones dressed in the dark, her hands moving gentle over buttons while her face stayed set like plaster. Sam sat at the table with his jaw hard and his fists closed. Lucy had Ben and Etta close on either side of her, an arm around each, and Etta had not made a sound in 2 days. Not since Thaddeus had leaned down and told her, soft as poison, that little girls who cried were sent to houses where crying was not allowed. "He's early," Ruth said. Caleb looked up. She stood in the doorway with her shawl about her shoulders, and she was listening the way an animal listens. Then he heard it 2 hoofbeats, not one wagon coming slow up the lane, many horses coming fast. He set the cup down without a sound. "That's not the lawyer." The first shot broke the morning open. It came from the tree line north of the barn, and the window beside Caleb's head went to white lace and falling glass. He had the children on the floor before the second shot, moving without thinking, one hand flat against Ben's back and the other dragging Lucy down by her collar. "Down," he said. "Down and stay down and do not get up for anybody but me or Miss Ruth." Ruth was already crawling to the little ones. "The Cade gang." He said it and knew it for truth even as he said it, the strongbox. They had come at last, and they had come at the 1 hour when the ranch would be turned inside out and every eye pointed the wrong way. "They knew," he said, low and savage. "They knew about the handover. Somebody told them the day." Ruth's eyes met his across the floor, and he watched the same cold, understanding land in her. Thaddeus. Thaddeus had bargained with dangerous men, and this was the shape of that bargain chaos bought and paid for. so that in the smoke and the shouting a certain lawyer might do quietly what the law had not yet let him do. "Stay with them," Caleb said, and took the rifle down from over the door. He did not want to leave the house, but the shots pulled wide toward the barn now, deliberate, drawing him, a man on horseback wheeling in the open yard, firing at the stock pens and the water trough, and Caleb knew a lure when he saw one and knew also that if he stayed pinned in the house, they would burn it down around all of them. He went out the back low and fast, put the smokehouse between himself and the rider, and when the man came around again, Caleb dropped his horse from under him and sent the outlaw sprawling into the dust. It bought a minute. It cost him everything. Because while Caleb was in the yard, the wagon came. It came not up the lane, but along the old cattle trail behind the barn, and it came without hurry, and driving it was no outlaw at all but Uncle Thaddeus himself in his good gray coat, 2 hard men riding alongside. He had timed it exactly. He had known exactly where Caleb would have to be. Ruth saw the wagon from the kitchen window and understood in one breath. She flung the door open, not away from the guns, but toward them, toward the children being the whole of her thought, and she put herself in the yard between the little ones and the men climbing down. "You will not," she said, her voice shook and did not break. "You will not touch them." "Miss Ruth," Thaddeus stepped down almost kindly, "you are a governess with no name on any paper. Stand aside, or my associates will move you aside, and I promise you the children would rather not see that." She did not stand aside. She was slight and unarmed, and her hands were trembling, and she planted her feet in the dust like a fence post driven deep. So one of the hard men took her by the arm, and when she fought, raking and twisting and screaming for Caleb until her voice tore, he struck her across the face hard enough to put her down on her knees, then dragged her back by the collar and left her there. They took the children out of the house. Lucy came fighting, Ben went limp and wailing, and it was Sam who had tried so hard to be a man too soon, who broke free at the wagon's tail and threw himself back shouting at his name, because in the confusion the smallest twin had bolted out the door for the barn where Caleb had gone. A rider swung his mount to cut her off. Sam reached her first. He got both arms around his little sister and turned his own body to the horse, and the animal's shoulder caught him and flung the 2 of them into the fence rail. He got up slow, with his arm hanging wrong and his face white and a long scrape down his cheek. But he got up, and he kept his body between Etta and the world, a 12-year-old boy with a broken arm, still standing guard. Then the men had them, all of them loaded, the wagon already turning. Caleb came around the barn at a dead run, and it was too late. It was already too late. The wagon was moving, and there were 6 mounted guns between him and it, and if he fired, he would fire into the children. He ran anyway. He ran until his lungs were fire, and the wagon was a shape shrinking up the back track. And the last thing he heard over his own heartbeat was a child's cry unspooling thin on the morning air, higher, and then gone. He stopped. He stood in the middle of the trail with the rifle useless in his hands and the dust settling and the sound of the horses fading. And for one terrible stretch, he simply could not move at all. He had given his word. He had knelt in the desert with 4 frightened children and given them his plain word that he would get them home and keep them safe. And here was the yield of it. A ransacked yard, blood in the dust, and the children gone up a road he could not catch. All his life he had believed a man's word was the last thing that could not be taken from him. He had buried a wife and gone quiet as a stone, and the one thing he had left himself was that, if Caleb said a thing, it held, and it had not held at all. "Caleb." He turned. Ruth was coming toward him across the yard, and she was a sight to stop the heart, her cheeks swelling dark, blood at the corner of her mouth, her hair torn down, one sleeve half off her shoulder. She had crawled up out of the dirt where they had thrown her, and she was walking, and her eyes were not broken. That was the thing he saw and would never forget. Battered as she was, her eyes were not broken. "They took them," he said, and his voice came out of him like something dragged over gravel. "Ruth. They took all of them, and I stood in the yard and let it happen." "You didn't let anything happen." She reached him and took the front of his shirt in both her shaking hands, not to hold herself up but to make him look at her. "You listened to me. They planned this to the minute. They split us on purpose. They knew the hour because that snake told them, and there's not one thing you could have done alone against all of them but die in this dirt. And then who would go after them? Who?" Her breath caught, ragged, furious. "Not the law. The law handed him the papers. Not the marshal who's a day's ride off. Us. It's us or it's nobody, do you hear me?" He looked at her. At the swelling on her face she did not seem to feel, at the grip of her small hands twisted in his shirt, at the fury and the love burning off her like heat off summer stone. And something in him that had gone to ash began, very slowly, to catch again. "No law," he said. "No laws. No lawyer, no outlaw, no wagon," his jaw set. "Not one of them takes these children and lives easy after." "Not one," she said. That was when they heard it. A small sound from behind them, from the doorway of the house, a scrape of a shoe. They both turned. And there in the open door, where she had somehow slipped free in the last of the confusion and hidden herself behind the flour barrel and been overlooked, stood Etta. 6 years old, silent for 2 days, silent since the day the world came apart on a desert road. She stood in the doorway with her thumb in her mouth and her eyes enormous, and she looked at the man standing bloodied and breaking in the middle of the yard, and she took her thumb from her mouth, and she said, clear as a struck bell in the terrible quiet, "Caleb." Just his name, the first word she had spoken since the wreck. His name said like a rope thrown to a drowning man. He crossed that yard on his knees to reach her and gathered her up against his chest, and Ruth's arms came around them both, and for the space of 3 breaths, the 3 of them held on to each other in the wreckage of the morning. Then Caleb stood with the child on his hip and looked at Ruth over the top of her head, and there was no grief left in his face at all. There was only the stillness that comes before a hard thing is done, and done all the way. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Try and stop me." He carried Etta inside and told her, low and sure, that he was coming back and bringing every one of the others with him, and he believed it as he said it, and she believed him, and that was worth more than an army. Then he went to the barn. The gray dawn was full light now, cold and clean. Caleb saddled the bay and threw a saddle over the roan for Ruth, loaded the rifle and the pistol and filled the canteens, and moved without wasted motion, the way a man moves when he has stopped hoping and started acting. Ruth came out with her torn sleeve pinned up and swung up onto the roan without waiting for a hand. They turned the horses toward the back track, toward the road that ran up into the broken country where the Cade gang kept its hold, toward the wagon and the outlaws and the cold, smiling man who had sold 4 children to killers for a strongbox and a name on a deed. Caleb looked once at the woman beside him, ruined and unbroken in the rising light, and she looked back, and neither of them said a word because there was nothing left that needed saying. Then he touched his heels to the bay, and they rode out into the dawn with nothing left to lose. Chapter 9, You're Mine Now. The outlaw camp sat in a fold of the hills where a dry creek had once run, a scatter of firelight and canvas ringed by broken cottonwoods. Caleb lay flat against the cold ground at the lip of the rise and counted men the way he counted fence posts, slow, deliberate, missing none. 6, he murmured, maybe 7 if the one by the wagon ain't just shadow. Beside him, Ruth pressed close to the earth, her breath fogging faint in the gray before dawn. Blood had dried dark at her temple where the gang had struck her, and she had refused, twice now, to let him look at it. She followed his gaze to the fire, and he felt her go still when she found what he had been dreading she would find. The children. All 4 of them, huddled together on a fallen log near the flames, a rope run loose around the smallest twin's wrists. Sam sat with his arm bound in a sling of torn shirt, his chin up, his eyes moving, still trying to be a man, still standing guard over the others with nothing but the set of his jaw. Lucy had the twins tucked against her sides. Etta's face was pressed into her sister's shoulder. "They're alive," Ruth breathed. Her hand found his sleeve and gripped it. "Caleb, they're alive." "They are." He put his hand over hers once and left it there a moment longer than a man of few words should have. "And they're coming home." Behind them, low in the wash, Marshal Hollis eased down off his horse with the care of an old man who knew his knees. 3 of Caleb's neighbors came with him, Dunn and the Prout brothers, hard men with harder rifles, men who had buried their own and understood what it was to lose children to the country. Hollis worked a plug of tobacco to the corner of his mouth and studied the camp the way Caleb had. "That's Thaddeus's rig," the marshal said quietly, nodding at the buckboard drawn up between the tents. "Fine city wagon out here in the rocks. He's come to deal." "Deal for what he was already trying to steal," Ruth said, and there was iron under the tremor in her voice. Hollis spat. "Cade's got the children. Thaddeus wants 'em signed over so the estate falls to him clean, and somewhere in that camp is the box that mother died hidden." He looked at Caleb. They'll trade. Cade don't care about orphans. He wants what the coach was carrying. Thaddeus wants the paper that comes with the young ones. Point is, for a little while, everybody down there is looking at each other instead of at us. Then that's when we go, Caleb said. The plan was thin, the way plans made in the dark always were. Hollies would take the two Prutes wide to the east and come at the fire from the front, badge and rifle and the weight of the law behind his voice. A wall for the outlaws to look at. Dunn would hold the horses and the far side. And Caleb would go down through the cottonwoods on the blind flank, low and quiet, and get the children out one at a time while every eye in the camp was turned the wrong way. I'm coming with you, Ruth said. It was not a question. He looked at her a long moment. There had been a time, a lifetime of days ago, when he would have told a woman to stay back where it was safe. But he had watched this one walk 100 miles of open country on a bad ankle to find these children, and he knew better than to waste his breath. Stay at my shoulder, he said. When I hand a child up, you take him and you run for Dunn. Don't stop. Don't look back for me. Caleb, don't look back for me, he said it gentle. Then softer still, a thing he had not meant to say aloud. I mean to get all of you home, all of you. She held his eyes. Whatever she read there made her nod once and swallow and grip her skirts up out of the way. They went down through the trees. Below, the deal was breaking open. Thaddeus stood by his fine wagon in his fine coat, his lawyer's smile thin and stretched, and across the fire from him stood Rowan Cade, calm, courteous, one thumb hooked in his belt like a man discussing the price of cattle. The box first, Cade was saying, pleasant as Sunday. Then your papers, then the children. That was the arrangement, counselor. The arrangement, Thaddeus answered, was that you deliver them quiet, not trust them like veal for the whole county to hear scream. His eyes flicked to the children and away, cold as a ledger. I have a reputation to consider. You've a neck to consider, Cade said, still smiling. Same as the rest of us. Under the cottonwoods, Caleb reached the log from behind. Sam saw him first. The boy's whole body jerked, and then, God bless him, he did the bravest thing Caleb had yet seen him do. He did nothing. He looked away back at the fire and gave no cry, and only his good hand moved, sliding across the log to touch Lucy's arm in warning. Caleb's knife parted the rope at the twins' wrists in 2 strokes. He put his mouth close to Etta's ear. It's me, he whispered. It's Caleb, I've got you. He lifted her, she came up light as a bird and clung to his neck with a strength that shook him, and passed her back into Ruth's arms. Ruth was gone with her into the dark before the child had drawn a second breath. Ben next, silent Ben, going stiff and then boneless with relief. Caleb steered him toward the trees where Dunn waited. Lucy he had to peel loose one finger at a time, because she would not go until she was sure the others had. Go on, he breathed. I'll bring your brother, go. Then it was only Sam, and the fire, and the men who did not yet know their prize was slipping away. The boy stood, cradling his bad arm, and for one bright, terrible instant his foot dragged a stone. Cade's head turned. Now Hollies, Caleb roared, and the night came apart. The marshal's voice rolled down out of the east like a landslide, federal law, throw down, hands where I can see them, and a rifle spoke over the outlaws' heads and put a burning brand of a bullet into the dirt at Cade's feet. The camp erupted. Men grabbed for guns and for horses. One bolted straight into Dunn's waiting shotgun and thought better of everything. Caleb got an arm around Sam and hauled him bodily off the log as the fire scattered sparks. Thaddeus, quick as the rat he was, lunged not for a weapon but for the strongbox where it sat beside Cade's saddle. And Cade, seeing his whole scheme running out into the dark, caught the lawyer by the collar. Where are they? The outlaw demanded, wheeling toward the empty log, the cut ropes, the nothing. Where are they? Right here. Caleb stood between the outlaws and the trees, Sam behind him, and he did not shout it. He said it plain, the way he said everything. And you're done reachin' for 'em. For a moment Cade only looked at him, this quiet man in a dusty coat who had walked 4 children out from under his nose. Then Hollies and the Prutes came into the firelight with 3 rifles leveled, and the arithmetic of it settled even on a man as calm as Rowan Cade. 2 of his men were already down in the dirt with their hands laced behind their heads. The rest were horseback and gone into the gray. Rowan Cade, Hollies said, you are under arrest for robbery and murder on the high road and for the talkin' of these children. Get down on your knees. Cade smiled his courteous smile one last time. Then he opened his hand and let it fall away from his gun and knelt. It was Thaddeus who could not stop talking. "Marshal, thank God, these criminals abducted my wards. I came alone to ransom them at great personal." "You came to buy 'em," Holly said, "and sell what they're worth." He jerked his chin at the strongbox. "Open it." The lock had been shot away hours since. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth against a mother's last careful hands, lay a folded deed and a letter and a small purse of coin. And Ruth, come back out of the dark with Etta still on her hip, read the deed aloud in a voice that shook and then steadied, and every man at the fire heard it. The land, the estate, all of it left in trust to the children direct, with a guardian to be of their own choosing and no other, never to Thaddeus, never his to sell, never his at all. "It was never yours," Ruth said, and looked at the uncle across the fire. "You'd have institutionalized them and pocketed the lot, and it was never yours for a single hour." Thaddeus's smile came apart at last, and what was under it was not worth looking at. Hollies took him by the arm. "Consortin' with the Cade gang," the marshal said mildly, "and conspirin' in the robbery that killed their mother. That'll do for a start. You'll answer for it in a real courtroom, counselor. Bet you'll feel right at home." And then the camp was only firelight, and the smell of powder and 4 children running. They came out of the dark all at once, Lucy first with Ben's hand in hers, and Sam turning loose of Caleb's coat, and Etta wriggling down out of Ruth's arms, and they hit Caleb like a wave hits a man waiting, and near knocked him off his feet, and he went down to one knee in the dust and gathered every last one of them into his arms. He held them, the little ones burrowed in. Sam's stiff shoulders finally shook, and Caleb pressed his rough cheek to the top of Etta's head and felt Ruth's hand come to rest on his back, and he said the thing low, only for them, the way a man makes a vow he means to keep past his own dying day. "You're mine now," he whispered. "All of you, everyone. Nobody takes you again, not the law, not a lawyer, not a whole camp of hard men, you hear me? You're mine, I gave my word, and my word's a house you can live in the rest of your lives." Etta's small voice came muffled against his collar. "Yours," she said. He shut his eyes. Then he lifted his face to Ruth, kneeling there in the ash and the gray light with blood on her temple and the whole exhausted shine of hope in her eyes. And he did not have a fine speech in him. He never had. "You too," he whispered. "If you'll have a quiet man and a full house, you're mine, Ruth. Say it and it's done." Her hand slid from his back to his jaw. She was crying and smiling both. "Yes," she whispered, "yes. I'm yours and they're ours, and I have never in my life been so sure of a single thing." The sun came up over the broken hills as they rode home, all of them, the children doubled up before and behind on borrowed horses, Etta asleep against Caleb's chest and Ruth close at his side. Behind them Hollies had his prisoners, behind them the danger stayed, spent and done. Before them the road ran gold and long and open, and this time at the end of it there was a house, and it was theirs, and the word he had given on a bloodied prairie road was kept. Chapter 10, Home and all of them mine. The paper that voided Uncle Thaddeus came in a plain envelope, and Caleb thought it strange that so much weight could travel so light. Marshal Hollies brought it out to the ranch himself on a morning turned gold at the edges, the last of the summer heat gone soft. He sat his horse a moment at the gate, looking at the place the way a man looks at something he had feared he'd find broken, and finding it whole instead. Then he swung down, slow the way his knees had made him slow, and handed the envelope to Ruth first, which Caleb noticed and was glad of. "Circuit judge signed it," Hollies said. "Claims dead. Thaddeus Vane will answer for what he did in the county seat, and there's a fair stack of charges waiting on him, conspiracy chief among them. He and Cade were closer than kin, turns out. The strongbox told the whole tale once we got it open." Ruth's hands did not shake when she took the envelope. That was the thing Caleb kept coming back to later. There had been so many days her hands had shaken and held steady anyway. Now they simply held. "And the estate?" she asked. "In trust." Hollies produced a second paper folded square. "The deed your sister sewed into that coat lining, it names the children plain, and it names a condition. Estates to be held for them till they're grown, managed by their lawful guardians." He let that word sit. "Judge asked me who those might be." The porch had gone quiet. Somewhere behind the house Ben was explaining something to Etta at great volume, and Etta was answering, the way she had not answered anyone for weeks after the wreck, and the sound of her small voice threading through the morning was the finest thing Caleb owned. "He asked me," Hollies went on, "and I told him I expected he'd hear from you both directly. The old marshal touched his hat brim. "I'd not keep him waiting long if I were you." He mounted up. He looked once more at the yard, at Sam mending the very fence rail Caleb had shown him how to mend, at Lucy in the doorway with flour to her elbows and no baby on her hip for the first time in memory, and something in the marshal's weathered face eased. "You did right by your word, Mr. Reese," he said. "Not many do." And he turned the horse and rode out the way he'd come, unhurried, a man who had been slow to move and harder to stop, and who now had nowhere left he was needed. They watched the dust of him settle back into the road. "He's right," Ruth said softly, "about not keeping the judge waiting." Caleb looked at her. All the words he did not have crowded up behind his teeth the way they always did. But he had learned something, these last weeks, learned it from a silent child who had finally spoken his name in the gray dawn of the worst morning of his life. Some words you had to give whether they came easy or not. "Marry me," he said, not just for the paper, not just to keep them." He stopped, made himself go on. "I'd have asked you if there'd never been a lawyer or an outlaw within 100 miles. I'd have asked you slower, but I'd have asked." Ruth's eyes went bright. She pressed the envelope to her chest with both hands, the way she'd once pressed a frightened twin, the way she held the things that mattered. "You took 4 children off a road in the middle of nowhere," she said, "and you kept every one of them alive with one canteen in your bare hands and never once told them how afraid you were. Do you think I could look at that and not?" Her voice caught. She laughed instead of finishing, wet and unashamed. "Yes, Caleb, yes." From the doorway Lucy said, very carefully, "Does that mean we're staying?" And it was not a question the way she said it, more a thing tested to see if it would hold weight. "It means," Ruth said, "you're staying." Lucy set down the bowl. She was 9 years old and she had carried the little ones through fire and dark and 100 miles of fear. And now, at last, in the sunlit doorway of a house that had become a home without anyone naming the day it did, she let it go. She cried the way a child cries, freely, hugely, and Ruth crossed the porch and gathered her up, flour and all, and did not tell her to stop. They were married 3 weeks later, in the yard, under a sky scrubbed clean by the first cool wind of the turning year. There was no church for miles, so the circuit preacher came to them, a spare man who married and buried the whole of that country and had learned to do both plainly. Neighbors came, the same hard, quiet men who had ridden with Caleb toward the outlaw hold and asked no thanks for it, come now in their good shirts with their wives and their covered dishes. Hollies came, out of his badge for the day, and stood at the front like family, because he had earned the place. Caleb wore his one clean coat. Ruth wore a dress the neighbor women had made over between them, blue as deep water, and she came out of the house with her hand on Sam's arm because the boy had asked, gruff and red-eared, if he might walk her, seeing as there was no other man to. Caleb had told him there was no man he'd sooner have do it. The twins scattered late wildflowers, which was to say Etta scattered them, and Ben announced each one by name. Lucy stood up front holding the ring on a bit of ribbon, grave as a judge, guardian of that one small trust. The preacher spoke the plain words, and when he came to the part where he might have stopped, Caleb held up one hand easy and asked leave to say something himself. He turned to the children first. He had thought once that he had no words in him. He had been a shut door of a man, all his talk buried with the wife he'd lost, and he had believed that door would stay shut till they laid him down. 4 children had walked out of a wrecked stagecoach and pushed it open with their small hands, and now the words came and he let them. "Sam," the boy stood straighter, "you tried to be a man before your time, and I told you to let that wait. I'll tell you now you're a fine son, and there's no hurry to be anything but that." Sam's jaw worked. He nodded once hard. "Lucy, you carried them all when there was no one else to. You can set that down now. You're mine to carry, same as the rest." Ben, the boy, grinned up at him. "Never stop asking. Somebody in this house ought to." Etta, she looked up. She had not spoken for a long time after the road, and the first word she'd ever given him back had been his own name, called across a dark morning when he'd thought all was lost. He knelt to her now, here in the sun. "You called me once when you were afraid. You can call me anything you like from here on, but I'd be proud if it stayed the same." She considered this with the whole solemn weight of 6 years old. Then she said, clear enough for the back rows to hear, "Pa," and the yard made a sound like a held breath let go. He stood, he turned to Ruth, and what he had whispered once in dust and firelight with a child's cry still fading up a road, the claim he'd made in the dark over all of them, low and fierce, that no one would take them again, he said now in daylight, unafraid, for everyone to hear. "You're mine now," he said, "all of you, and I'm yours, out loud this time, where it counts." Ruth's answer had been a whisper that other night. It was not a whisper now. "Yes," she said, "all of us." Home. The preacher, who had married and buried that whole country and thought he'd seen the shape of most of it, cleared his throat and found he had to look at the ground a moment before he could go on. Autumn came in gentle that year. The estate held in trust for them, the letters told it plain. The children would want for nothing, and would owe nothing to any man who tried to sell them. Thaddeus Vane went to answer for himself in the county seat, and did not come back to that country, and the name Cade passed out of the hills the way a bad season passes, spoken of only to be glad it was gone. Caleb mended his fences. He taught Sam the whole of it, and Sam, allowed at last to simply be a boy, was somehow more a man for it than all his early trying had made him. Lucy learned that a house could hold more than one pair of hands, and let hers rest sometimes, and was surprised each time to find the world went on. The twins grew loud and brown and underfoot, and Etta, who had been silent, could hardly be hushed, and no one tried very hard. Ruth taught them their letters at the kitchen table in the evenings, and Caleb sat by with his mending, and pretended he was not learning the sums along with them. There were hard nights still. Etta woke sometimes crying from a dream of dust and gunfire, and it was Caleb who went to her, every time, sitting on the edge of her small bed in the dark and saying nothing much, only being there, large and steady, until the shaking passed. Ben would ask about his mother out of a clear sky, and Ruth learned to tell him the true things, that she had loved them, that she had hidden away all she owned to keep them safe. They did not paper over the grief. They made room for it, the way Caleb had once made room in his own shut heart, and found a house was big enough to hold both the sorrow and the joy without either crowding out the other. Word got round the country, the way word does the rancher who'd found 4 children in a wreck and would not put them down. The hard men who'd ridden with him toward the outlaw hold took to stopping by of a Sunday, their wives too, and the lonely spread a day off the stage road became a place folks turned their horses toward. Caleb, who had lived alone with his grief for years, found his table crowded and his quiet broken, and had no wish at all to have it back the way it was. And on a dusk in the fall, the light gone that same worn gold as the day the marshal rode out, they sat all of them on the porch, the way families do at the end of a day that asked nothing terrible of them. The road ran out past the gate the same as any road, the same dust on the same wind that had carried them all to grief a season past. But it did not lead away now. It led home, and everyone on that porch knew the difference. Ruth had set the table before they came out. Caleb had seen it through the window and stopped a moment in the doorway to look. Once there had been 4 plates on a stranger's table, and a man who did not know how to fill them. Now there were 6. He carried the last of the light in with him and shut the door soft against the coming cool. And inside the house, 4 children and the woman he had married were waiting on him to say the blessing. And he found, after all his silent years, that he had the words.